Today we're looking at Roland's first digital drum machine, the Roland TR-707. And with prices on the used market approaching $1,000, the question has to be asked, is it worth it? Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're talking about Roland's first digital drum machine, the TR-707. The TR-707 came out shortly after the 909 in late 1984, early 1985. You can see some articles that were published about it at that time. And digital was all the rage back then. It was considered more realistic, and realism was the thing that people wanted at that time. The LinnDrum was one of the most loved digital drum machines, and the Roland had produced the 606, the 808, the 909, which were all commercial failures for the most part, and which used analog circuitry and weren't considered really very realistic sounding. They later went on to become classics and have a massive impact on all sorts of pop and electronic music. And the 707 was their first hurrah into the digital world with drum machines. And what makes it unique in a lot of ways is that even though it is a digital drum machine, it's really also a hybrid drum machine. And so there's two things that are unique. There's one that it was hybrid, and two, that's incredibly lo-fi samples that are inside the 707. It has, I think, 8-bit and 6-bit samples. I think the 6-bit are the cymbals and the 8-bit are the rest of it. And the way they generated the sounds, because digital technology was expensive and it was still in its early stages, the samples that they used in the PCM to kind of store the samples didn't have decays, so they would have the sample and they would pass it through to an analog envelope and VCA to produce the end sound. And so it's got some quirkiness to it because it's using analog circuitry to process digital samples, and it gives it a very unique kind of tone. And when you listen to it, people still like the 707 because it has a different tone. You have 707 samples that you can download. They've been around forever. Even Roland has ACB versions of the 707, the 727 as well, that you can get in their TR-8S or their TR-6S or through the Roland Cloud. And it's really interesting to note that they went through all the effort of going and seeing how those analog components and the lo-fi samples affected the end result of the sound and gave its kind of color and quirkiness. Roland's done a great job with their ACB technology. It really does a very good job of recreating these classic vintage instruments and all their quirks. This also has some quirks with just its tempo and its reliability. It's a little quirky. It's not necessarily, doesn't behave like the drum machines of today, that are digital, of course, that are very predictable in the way they behave. So other interesting things of note, it's got 15 different sounds in it. There are no parameters that you can modify except volume, and you have accent, which can kind of affects the loudness, but pretty simple. It has shuffle and flam, which you can apply and also kind of gives you some expressive possibilities. It has individual outs for all the drum sounds, which is nice as you can apply effects and kind of EQ it and pan it through outboard effects and a mixer. People like it for that reason. Also has a screen that shows you what you're programming, which is also a nice touch. A lot of folks like this about the 707, and it has MIDI and DIN sync connectivity, so it can be used to sequence other drum machines and other more primitive vintage pieces with its DIN sync connectivity. So that's really pretty much it. It's not the hardest thing to program. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to program a basic pattern, not going to be the craziest, just so you can kind of hear all the notes, and I'll try and use all the different voices. And then we'll wrap up with some thoughts on whether or not it's worth it. Is it still relevant? So there you have it, the TR-707. What do you think? Do you like it? Do you think it sounds kind of dated? I personally think it has a very nice, warm, lo-fi sound. I do think it's unique. I have listened to the 707 samples not samples, sorry, the ACB recreations in the Roland TR-8S and the 6S, and I really do think they do an excellent job. I haven't done a side-by-side of the 707 versus the ACB recreations, but if it's anything like the other ACB recreations, it does an awesome job of recreating it, but it doesn't always line up one-to-one. It tends to be a little bit brighter and a little bit more modern sounding, although it does still capture all the quirks and characteristics. It's hard to describe. I think it does an excellent job, and you're nitpicking if you can tell the difference or can really say that it has a very different flavor. I think the 707 does have a nostalgia factor with it and does give you kind of that vintage feel with its kind of tempo quirks and also its just overall flavor. And I think with its analog circuitry, each one's gonna sound a little different. It's gonna be a little inconsistent. Is it worth $1,000? I think that's ridiculously expensive for what it is. I also don't understand why the 606 is still so much less expensive, because I really like the 606 compared to the 707. I'm sure someone can illuminate me below on why that is. But I think it's priced a little high. I don't think it's the most unique sounding or the most interesting sounding drum machine, but it is a vintage Roland drum machine, and it did play a role in electronic music, in electronic music history. And so there is kind of a history collectability standpoint. I couldn't find information on how popular these were and how many were sold. So it's hard to say how rare they are, but my gut is that for $1,000, it might not be the best investment, both from a collector standpoint and a sound standpoint. That's just my opinion. I would love to hear yours. Please leave your comments below. Please leave your thoughts. What did I leave out? What other interesting facts about the 707 are there? We'd love to hear from you. If you didn't, again, please subscribe, turn your notifications, and you can come visit us at alamomusic.com. If you have any other questions or want to talk more, thanks for watching.